Everyone, welcome to Denver. I know there's a few of you that are first timers. There's a few out there that have probably been here for their third time. So we all appreciate you sitting in on this session. Now, for those in the back, don't be shy. There's plenty of seats up front, so you can move closer, and it makes it a lot easier for you to ask questions later on. Anyway, Scott mentioned this is securing data in the cloud. Right, securing the self center. What does that really mean? Well, if you think about security nowadays, and you think about the concept of a perimeter, the perimeter is eroding, right? It's going away. We're starting to go to zero trust models and things like that. So different organizations or departments within an organization really need to think about and consider how they're protecting their assets. And that's why we've invited one of our customers up here today to tell their story. So without further ado, if you don't know me, my name is Rich Bacus. I don't play a very critical role here. I'm the MC for one of my sales engineers, Jojo Brodamante, and our guest, Lisa Scritchfield from the Whole Foods Market. So Jojo, Lisa, just take a minute and introduce yourself. That'd be great.
Hi, I'm Lisa Scritchfield. I'm a senior security DevOps engineer at Whole Foods Market. And I first started with the company in March of 2018. And I actually started as a data warehouse developer. I don't really have a big security background, but I was presented with this opportunity to join the security team a few months after I started. And I thought that because of my familiarity with the data warehouse and because of my technical experience from prior roles that I've had, that it would make me a really good fit for this position. And my team and I, we came to Rhythm World last year, and we were talking about our use cases. We had just started doing our requirements gathering and starting to implement our MVP use cases. And we were talking about how we're using LogRhythm to other users, and we realized that we had a really unique set of use cases. So I'm really excited to talk about those with you today.
And my name is Jojo Brodamante. I am a sales engineer for LogRhythm. Been with the company for going on 12 years now, so quite a long time. Probably know quite a few of you out there. I had the pleasure of working with Lisa and the other Whole Foods team to help them come up with a solution for their specific and very unique requirements. So, and continue to work together to enhance those additional projects that they're working on as well.
Thank you, Duke. Thank you to both of you. As far as the agenda goes, we're going to try and cover the soup to nuts. It can be a very complicated topic, but we'll talk about the problem set, how Whole Foods arrived at a solution, were there any additional benefits, and then are there any future plans? So without further ado, let's step in, and we're going to let Lisa talk for just a few minutes. She wants to tell us a few things about Whole Foods Market and a few of the charges that warm her heart.
Thanks, Rich. So how many of you have Whole Foods Market in the city or town that you live in? Wow, okay, that's way more than I thought it would be. I have heard that there's a mac and cheese bar in this one, just so you know. So I see that a lot of you are familiar with Whole Foods Market, and I thought that I was too before I started working for the company. So what I wanted to talk through with you today is something that I didn't already know about the company that I think is a really great representation of Whole Foods and how we give back. And that's with our 3 foundations. So the first foundation is Whole Planet Foundation. This foundation empowers the world's poorest people with microcredit, giving them the opportunity to create or expand their home-based businesses, lifting themselves and their families out of poverty. 88% of our microloan holders are women entrepreneurs, and we have a 97% repayment rate on those loans. The average first loan amount is just $184. The second is Whole Cities Foundation. This foundation started in Detroit and is expanding access to fresh foods and healthy eating education across local communities. 24 million Americans live in these local neighborhoods that have limited or no access to fresh, healthy foods. So we've partnered with over 150 nonprofit organizations in the United States and Canada, and we've contributed over $1.2 million to these local communities. Last but not least is our Whole Kids Foundation. This foundation provides schools with salad bars, we provide grants for school gardens, and we also offer cooking and nutritional education to school teachers and staff. We've funded over 400 B grants, we've opened 5,000 salad bars, and we also are engaged in over 11,000 schools. I'm a data person, and I really wanted to share some cool statistics on how Whole Foods is making a difference in the world.
I don't know about you, but that makes me want to be a better human being.
Me too. So these are our core values at Whole Foods. I don't want to talk through all of these, but I do want to pick out a couple of my favorites and the ones that mean the most to me. So the first is that we care about our communities and the environment. It's obvious how we leverage these three foundations to broaden our community impact. We also have industry-leading quality standards, and my most favorite example of this is that we've recently become the first national US grocer to completely ban all plastic straws in all of our stores. The second favorite core value that I have is that we satisfy and delight our customers. This is a big one to me, and I think about our customers in a couple of different ways. The first are the customers that I can directly impact, and a good example of this is how our team worked closely with the customer care platform team so that we could help them implement the Salesforce use cases that they had within LogRhythm. The second is a little bit more obvious. It's the customers. Whoa. Thank you, Rich. It's the customers that we have that are shopping in our stores. And I want to make sure that our customers have the most positive experiences possible when they shop here. So how can I do that? I'm not working in the bakery or the floral shop or produce, but what I can do is provide the confidence that they need to know that their transactional data is secure. Our customers are our highest priority at Whole Foods, and securing their transactional data becomes our team's top priority. And that's why we implemented a SIM solution to begin with.
Thanks for that, Lisa. Now let's get right into the thick of it. When I sat down and I met with Lisa and her team for the first time down in Austin, I first thought, you're collecting data just like everyone else. There's nothing really special here. But then when I started to peel back the onion, the way they were going about leveraging LogRhythm was unique, right? It's something that certainly challenged LogRhythm in certain ways. It challenged Whole Foods, but at the end of the day, it's been a very successful project, and from what I'm hearing, the project's going to grow in the future. So, Lisa, let's jump in and talk through that challenge that you faced, and then we'll get into how you went about solving it.
So I love a good origin story, and Teradata is ours. Teradata is a data warehousing platform that we use to store all of our transactional data, and that in turn makes our team the transactional data guardians. At a really high level, we're focused on two major things here within LogRhythm. We want to monitor anybody who has elevated privileges within our data warehouse, and we also want to bring in those Salesforce user activity logs from our customer care platform team. The common thread here is that both the Teradata and the Salesforce teams didn't have good visibility into what their users were doing, and that's how we solved it, is implementing LogRhythm.
So this is one of the things I wanted to point out, right? Log data is log data is log data, but not nowadays, right? When you're working in the cloud, everything has changed, right? She had to deal with, I don't want to steal your thunder, but she had to deal with some challenges to consume this data and make it useful. So the solution, obviously, LogRhythm is part of the solution, but Lisa, tell us a little bit more about how you went through that selection process. Were there other vendors involved, and what did that scorecard look like?
Sure. So our team created a capability matrix. We wanted to compare LogRhythm against other SIM solutions to see which one would fit best with Whole Foods. So we knew that we wanted as close to real-time data as possible to quickly and efficiently respond to those alerts that came through. And we knew that LogRhythm would provide that. We also knew that it played really well with Teradata, our legacy system. And we also had a widespread use cases that we knew we wanted to implement at a later date, and LogRhythm was capable of handling those future use cases.
For the win. So when we talk about projects nowadays, everything is outcome driven, right? That's the conversation I hear all the time. We're selling outcomes. You're asking for outcomes. Outcomes are really driven by use cases, right? Without a use case, you've got nothing to measure. So Lisa has taken the time to pick out at least two of the use cases that helped her build a case and drive positive outcomes for her boss Ken and people above him in the organization.
So I wanted to cover a few of my favorites, and the first two really have to do with what I mentioned earlier, monitoring anybody who has elevated privileges within our data warehouse environment. And the last is a behavioral use case that we're actively working on so that we can start establishing what our normal logon patterns look like for the data warehouse users in our environment. So I can go ahead and take you through the first one, which is our temporary elevated privileges use case. This is my personal favorite because I think it's super cool. And you'll also hear me refer to this as the auto access grant process. So ultimately what we're doing here is we're restricting access for everyone. We implemented this process in October of 2018. And essentially what this meant is that there's not a single user within our data warehouse that has permanent DBA or elevated privileges. So how does a user get temporary elevated privileges? They must first have a valid business use case, and this could be a ticket ID, an incident number, a change request, etc. So once they have that submitted and fully approved, they can go ahead and call the stored procedure with a number of required parameters. You can see this example that I have here where I'm calling that auto access grant stored procedure, and the first parameter is that incident number that I just mentioned. So once you have that incident number, you can plug that into the first field. You can also have the desired role that you'd like to have. So this could be the DBA role, this could be a data warehouse developer role. And lastly, you have to define a time frame for how long you want the access for. This could be as little as 1 minute, and you can call that stored procedure as many times as you need to within that 2-hour time frame. But there's an absolute cap of 2 hours per incident. So you can see here that I've called the access for DBA role for 30 minutes, and the output message is listed below that it's been granted to my user.
There's a little bit of brilliance going on here, right? I mean, if you think about sudo on the Linux or Unix platforms, it's simple but powerful, right? It gives you access when you need it and only when you need it. And you've taken that and pushed that out to RDBMS systems. I like it. So, what I really want to talk through just real quickly when we get into this architecture diagram, right? We've developed these use cases, but what helped drive it, right? You had to have a starting point, and you had to think through a process in order to really understand what you wanted to capture, what roles you wanted to grant, and I could probably go on and on with a list of different data points that you wanted to be part of this particular use case. So talk through this real quick and help us understand how you arrived at where you did today.
Sure. So we did requirements gathering session for our auto access grant process, and it also resulted in this flow diagram. So you can see here that there's a lot going on in this slide, but ultimately 3 things must absolutely be true in order to get temporary elevated privileges. You must have that valid business use case, that change request. You must be an authorized user to run the stored procedure. And you must have a valid type of access request. You must have a valid role. If all of these are true, then the user is granted those temporary privileges for the allotted time that they've specified in the required parameter. Once that time limit has been reached, their access is automatically revoked. So if they continue to run that stored procedure within that 2-hour time frame, that's fine. But if their time limit has been reached with that 2-hour cap, and they need to continue working, they must submit a brand new incident number because it can be reused. And it has to be fully approved before they can put that new incident number in that required parameter.
So Lisa, something just dawned on me. I don't think I've ever asked what happens if all 3 of those criteria are not met.
They're not able to call the stored procedure successfully.
So there's a log message generated, so you're getting visibility into that particular failure.
That's right. The output message would be an error message instead of a successfully been granted that goal.
Sweet, thank you.
Yeah, so, I mean, in order for us to meet those specific requirements that Lisa just mentioned, right, those are 3 main criteria. And the first thing is we had to make sure that we grab the right information from the database. And you know, so we did that through UDLA. You know, first of all, raise a hand for those that know what UDLA is and are actually using it today in your environment. Perfect, quite a few of you. For those who don't use it or are not familiar with it, UDLA stands for Universal Database Log Adapter. It's our method of ingesting logs out of databases, database tables specifically. In this case, you know, we have a select statement which identifies what type of data and what data we want to pull from the database. In this case, you know, the main requirements that Lisa mentioned was they need to have some sort of incident number or ticket number. So that's why we have the ticket number there in that select statement. We also want to know who the user was, so username. And then what was their query exactly? So that query text. And lastly, there's a couple of other ones out there too that we need to know is the start time. Because she has a 2-hour limit in which they can go and run these queries, we need to know when they started, so that's what the start time was. A couple other things I want to point out is we have to also understand where a row stops and a new row is. So to do that, we have to have a unique identifier. In this case, UI was used for the unique identifier field, so we know when the rows began. As well as we have to know the sequence of events, what order in which these people were doing these types of activities. So we use, in this case, we use this timestamp for that particular use case. Now, this is just pulling the data in. We don't have a slide here to show the actual correlation rule, but we wanted to show you this because we'll show you a use case later on where we have the actual correlation rule, but we wanted to first let you know how we actually grab the data, and then on a different use case, some of the ways we use the correlation rules within LogRhythm.
And I think this just puts a bow around what attracted me to this problem set, right? It's seemingly simple on the surface, but they did a great job, defining gates before a user can access information, and then they're getting visibility into it from something that's not standard, right? Pushing these logs into a RDBMS system and then pulling them out via UDLA. I happen to like UDLA because it's simple. You can write rules relatively quickly, and I think Lisa could probably attest to that.
So what I love about this use case is that it wasn't part of our original scope. This wasn't part of our MVP requirements, but it actually surfaced based off of the activity that we were seeing once we implemented those use cases. So this is essentially tracking anytime a user executes a failed query. And what does it mean to have a failed query attempt? Well, this could be due to several things. So it could be because the object doesn't exist in that environment. So if they're trying to run a query in production, but if they try to run a query in dev, but they accidentally run it in production, well, some of those objects don't exist from environment to environment. So the object, they're going to get an error that says the object does not exist. It also could be due to lack of permissions. If they hadn't submitted that stored procedure, or called that stored procedure for the auto access grant, then they wouldn't be allowed those privileges to execute that query statement. And lastly, any syntax errors that are within the query statement alone. So all of these could result in a failed query attempt, and what we've built here is a threshold AIU rule that we have on the next slide that Jojo's going to be discussing, that has anytime a user executes more than 5 failed query attempts in 5 minutes or less, then this will trigger an alert. Well, ultimately, what we're doing here is we're tracking any user errors within the data warehouse. So we're not only tracking just those mistakes that they make, but we're also tracking anytime a user tries to view or modify data that maybe they don't have access to.
The reason we pulled this in, I like it because it's helping shore up their security posture, but it's also, if you take a step back and think about what it's doing, it's building a stronger organization, right? Because they're seeing failed query attempts, and that could be just due to lack of education, so they can get back in front of different teams and help them understand how to execute things quickly. We see that all the time with LogRhythm. You get implemented, and sooner than an organization realizes that they're seeing not glaring issues, but they're seeing challenges that they may not have seen before that they can now correct and build that stronger organization.
Yeah, and to meet this particular requirement, LogRhythm has hundreds of AI rules that's built in out of the box, right? And I'm sure many of you have used, many of those that's already built in, but some of you have had to do some customization. So Lisa, was this a customized correlation rule?
Yes, it was.
Absolutely. So, but this is a very simple one. It's basically a threshold, correlation rule, just looking for a couple of things. The main thing is, was this a successful login attempt or access attempt by somebody that was a privileged access user? So we made sure we brought that in. And again, we're looking at certain things, so we want to know, hey, was there an error when this person, did their particular procedure? And as she mentioned before, there is a threshold, so she mentioned 5 times. So if we see this particular user access and they're trying to get into something they shouldn't be doing over 5 times, then this will trigger and they'll receive an alarm on that. And we could take it even further using smart responses, something they haven't done yet. But in the future, we'll start using some automation around this as well.
Again, simple, right? Drag, drop, fill out your criteria, and you've got an effective rule in place to help you get your job done just that much quicker.
So the last use case that I want to discuss with you is our user logon behavior. And this tracks any time a user logs in or logs off from Teradata. And essentially what we're trying to track here is all the normal patterns for that particular user for their login activity. And we had a couple challenges regarding this. We have a data warehouse developer on-call rotation. So their normal patterns might look like 9 to 5 when they come into work and when they leave work. But they do have that on-call rotation. So if they log in at 2 a.m., it might trigger an alert because that's anomalous activity, but it might be because of an incident that happened overnight. And the other is that anytime we made a modification to an AIE rule that was existing, it would reset all of our baseline data. To resolve this, we've started to build these requirements to implement a new AIE instance, one per environment, so that we can isolate that AIE rule on its own, so that if we do make any modifications to those other AIE rules, it won't impact that baseline data that has been set already.
So I'm going to point out a few things here that I think are probably obvious to the audience, but user logon behavior, we're talking about behaviors. UEBA is popular in the space right now. Here's proof that you don't need machine learning to tackle that problem set, right? You can use scenario-based UEBA to accomplish some common or simpler tasks and then move into machine learning down the road once you've got that baseline layer in place when it comes to UEBA.
Yeah, and this is one of our rules that we had out of the box as well, a few tweaks in there, but essentially what this is doing a user behavior rule that uses an hour time period for your baseline. So we're monitoring user behavior for that hour time frame, get some particulars on what they typically do during an hour time frame, and then we're going to analyze and evaluate that information every 10 minutes over a 30-minute live period. So when we see some sort of deviation from that, then it will trigger anomalous behavior.
I do want to say that this is part of our dev environment use case. So ultimately what we'd like to do with this is track the activity of the user across a week instead of just an hour.
And again, right, they solve the problem without going to machine learning and helping their team understand what's potentially anomalous and what isn't, and building baselines without needing cloud AI or machine learning. However, there's, well, I think we'll talk about it a little further in the presentation, right? There's opportunity to move in that direction down the road.
So I wanted to give you a brief overview of the timeline of all of our use cases. So we started our project a year ago in August, and we started by doing our requirements gathering sessions for our MVP or minimum viable product use cases. This included any authentication failures within Teradata, any IPs that are coming in outside of the IP whitelist that we've configured within LogRhythm, any users that have been created or updated or modified in Teradata, and any query statements that have been run by those users. So what I mean by query statements run is that we've built a custom view within Teradata for a lot of these use cases. And so we're specifying a set of databases. So if somebody runs an insert, update, delete, merge, drop, etc. in Teradata on those databases, then we'll receive an alert. That next month, we implemented those 4 use cases using the custom views in Teradata that I just mentioned. We utilized the UDLA profile within LogRhythm that you just saw from JoJo, the MPE rules for parsing those logs, and of course AIE rules for alerting on that activity. In October, we implemented a few more use cases in our phase 2 and 3. We implemented the auto access grant, which I spoke about earlier. We implemented all the delete drop activity within Teradata, and we wanted to bring in all the SQL statement logs, not necessarily to alert on this activity, because there are thousands of logs that are coming through, but what we ultimately want to start doing is correlating the activity from when somebody runs that auto access grant stored procedure, and we want to tie it to the activity that they're doing within the data warehouse during the times that they have those elevated privileges. So in June of this year, fast forward a little bit, we helped out our customer care platform team implement the Salesforce use cases that they had. They wanted to track the user activity within Salesforce. So the first is any user that have viewed a certain number of records in a certain amount of time frame, viewed any reports or exported reports, any authentication failures within Salesforce, and any time a user logs in after hours. In August of this year, we've started our proof of concepts for the following log sources: Redshift, CloudWatch, CloudTrail, and S3. If you're sensing a theme here, it's because we're actively moving toward AWS.
First initiatives, I think we're all learning about that. So, right, take a look at the timeline. They spent roughly a year going from requirements all the way out through what I'll call phase 2. And I think if it weren't for their diligence with regard to project definition and sticking to that project and not letting anything creep, they might not be here. I see that quite often, so that's just food for thought when you get into a project, when you get into a POC. Make sure you stay focused. It really helped Lisa and team get to where they are today. Now, we've all been here, right? Implementation time. And there's always been those moments, right, where a potential mistake is made, or there's I call it a training exercise. Something is learned throughout that process. And Lisa's got a few that she'll share with us and talk through what she's going to do to avoid that in the future.
Yep. So the first is what I like to call not so fast exports. Fast exports is a Teradata utility that exports data out of Teradata and into flat files. We ended up not going with this solution because it increased the amount of data latency. And like I said before, our ultimate goal was to make sure we had as close to real-time data as possible. So to solve for this, we created custom views in Teradata instead. We also had, regarding the UDLA profile, we had some timestamp issues in making sure the timestamp matched what was in the position file. So we created a custom function within Teradata that converts that timestamp to the timestamp format that matched the position file. Migration issues. Has anyone else ever experienced any migration issues in LogRhythm, or is it just me? So we had migration issues with our MPE rules. So if you have an MPE rule that exists in dev and prod, but the rule ID doesn't match between them, then you'll receive some migration issues. And how we solve for this is we pulled a script from LogRhythm that auto-increments that rule ID in both environments so that each use case in each environment matches. Lastly, Salesforce API call had a daily collection time, and I can't even imagine how this was even possible or how people responded to alerts. So we only collected logs once a day, and that was around 5 or 6 in the morning. And it was based off of the current version that we were running in LogRhythm. So we updated our version to 7.4.5 at the time, which included an hourly call instead, which made testing so much better. But to skirt around our testing issues that we were receiving for our daily collection, we ended up utilizing the Echo tool within LogRhythm. And I'll let Jojo talk a little bit about how Echo works and also Open Collector.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the person that actually developed Echo is standing right here, Rich Bacus. But after this session, we actually have a session on Echo, so if you want to learn more about that, please attend that one. But essentially, to confirm that the correlation rule was going to work, it was very difficult with the fact that we're only pulling logs every 24 hours, so we had to do something about that. So, enter Echo. Echo is a way that allows us to basically replay the log data into LogRhythm once we have those messages, and then be able to test scenarios, with the correlation rule. So that's how we were able to test, hey, this rule actually does work because we replayed it and it triggered when it was supposed to. So that was one way to get around that particular issue that we're having here. But there was still yet another issue, which is they're still pulling data every 24 hours, and we had to deal with that. And as you mentioned, we actually had to go into engineering and say, hey, what can we do about that? So, LogRhythm being as flexible as we are, we went in over and beyond what we typically do, right? We went in there and essentially made an update to the agent code. Fortunately, unfortunately, that particular configuration is built into agent code, so we actually had to to provide an update to then change it to where we can do hourly. But we also have actually a better method moving forward, which is an open collector. This is something that they're going to be considering as well as we bring in more AWS logs into their environment. But there is a section later this afternoon on that. But that is our go-forward method of collecting cloud applications, cloud logs, etc., that we don't have to now use API to do that.
JoJo's story about Echo isn't entirely true. I raised it until it was an infant and then passed it on to Michael Santa and his talented engineering team, where it's in good hands now. So, right, throughout the implementation, right, we always want to be able to, raise up and show off our work, so that we're gaining additional funding down the road and growing any project that we've got. It's in our nature, right? We're engineers. We want to build and build and build. Tell us how Ken's been responding and some of the people he reports up to.
Sure. So we have had measurable success with LogRhythm. We've also implemented our MVP use cases an entire week ahead of schedule. And we've utilized the UDLA profile instead of using the fast export, which I mentioned earlier. We have an extendable set of alertable conditions. We've also minimized cost and disaster recovery by moving our platform into AWS. And we've tested this by taking a snapshot of our dev environment and restoring it. We've also promoted visibility to other teams at Whole Foods Market by doing teach-out sessions a lot like this one. We've worked closely with the customer care platform team in order to implement their Salesforce use cases, but we've also received requests to implement use cases regarding our decommissioned systems. As we move outside of Teradata and outside of our legacy systems, we want to start monitoring the activity of users who still have access to those old systems. And lastly, we finally have visibility of our data warehouse events. Before we implemented LogRhythm, we didn't really have good visibility into what those users were doing and what query statements they were running.
It's a breath of fresh air, isn't it? Once you gain visibility into something that you didn't have before. So, we've talked about some of the use cases, some of the machine-driven analytics, some scenario-based AI rules that you've built. But there's other parts to LogRhythm as well, and we know you're working on SOAR and getting the automation, the response built up. But what are you doing when you sit down in front of the keyboard and go hunting? How are you using LogRhythm to hunt?
So ultimately what we're doing here is we want to keep a watchful eye over anybody who has those elevated privileges like I discussed earlier. And we do want to start tying and correlating that activity between what we have from our auto access grant stored procedure use case and the activity that they're doing. So when we go hunting, it's usually for how long they've submitted that auto access grant stored procedure. We want to start monitoring what they're doing, what they're looking at during that time. So we want to keep that watchful eye over those users. We also want to track the activity of those users. So we want to know what statements they're running, what data they're looking at, or if they're modifying any data.
So, benefits of implementation, right? We've talked about your use cases. I think it's been a great success, and I know there's still work to do, but what else have you found? There's got to be other data points that you've been able to raise up and help grow this movement within Whole Foods.
So right off the bat, better security, greater visibility. We're also seeing better development behaviors from our data warehouse developers. So we're seeing fewer mistakes come through. Honestly, it's been a while since I've seen the failed query use case or alert on, because they know that one of us from our team will be at their desk asking questions on why they have submitted so many failed query attempts. So we're seeing better quality statements come through as well. For cross-team expansion at Whole Foods Market, I did mention that we did help our customer care platform team implement their use cases, but we're still working on pulling these decommissioned systems through LogRhythm. I just worked last week on pulling Oracle PeopleSoft data through a UDLA connection and successfully pulling those logs. And so after Rhythm World, I'll be working on parsing those logs and getting those to alert.
There's that visibility word again. And if I didn't know any better, it sounds like you're single-handedly making Whole Foods a stronger organization.
Not necessarily. It's a team effort.
So what's next? Expansion and adoption, right? We've gotten through phase one, we're starting phase two. Where do we go from there?
who are working on platform expansion. I mentioned earlier that we're implementing a new AIE instance, one per environment, so that we can isolate that behavioral use case on its own, that AIE rule, so that the baseline data isn't affected. We also want to implement a brand new test environment so that we're not migrating our dev objects to production. We're incorporating those new AWS sources that I talked about, the Redshift, S3, CloudWatch, and CloudTrail. We're also trying to correlate those use cases between the auto access grant process and all the query statements that have been run by the data warehouse developers. For modifications to IT risk and compliance, we're actively working on a solution that scans all of our structured and unstructured data for PII and PCI data. And we want to start monitoring the activity of what data the users are looking at and if it's sensitive so that we can start locking down that access.
And before I forget, I do want to point out that we do have additional sessions for both Echo and Data Collector. So if you've got cloud first initiatives like Whole Foods does, Open Collector is going to be of interest to you. If you've got a need to replay data for any reason, maybe to test a correlation rule, that Echo session will be of use to you. So what have we learned? Start small, keep it basic or distinct, right? Don't stray from that. Be flexible. Don't fear customization. Embrace it. Right? They went outside the box and worked around one of their problem sets by leveraging views within, was it Teradata? I think I got that right. Stop and measure. Because you've got to have something positive, something measurable to bring forward. Otherwise, you don't get to rinse and repeat. So it's just a cycle over and over again until they've got every log source that they can watch under the sun. So thanks. We certainly appreciate having you up here today, I would say.
Yeah, thank you. And how can you find me? Add me on LinkedIn. I would love to collaborate and share ideas with you. I love getting on community and looking through those articles. And I have mentioned to Rich, maybe we can open a Slack channel after Rhythm World that has Rhythm World specific topics. But please feel free to reach out to me. I'll be here all week throughout these sessions, and I'll be at the dinners and definitely happy hour. So feel free to come find me.
Jojo, Lisa, thank you. Does anyone in the audience have a question for myself or Jojo or Lisa?
We got a couple. So on,
Hear me okay?
so on the UDLA profile setup, did you guys have to take into any consideration, like having direct database access, kind of with your auto access?
You mean the user account for LogRhythm specifically?
So, I mean, it sounds like you're granting approval to a view within the Teradata schema.
That's right.
So, but you're using like a direct database call
Right.
from LogRhythm to make that?
That's right. So LogRhythm has its own service account within Teradata, and it has access to those views. So it doesn't have all Teradata access, but it does have that access to the specific views that we've created within Teradata, specifically for LogRhythm.
Is that part of like compliance or anything that you had to do? So
Not necessarily compliance, we just don't want to grant access to everything if we don't have to. We know that LogRhythm is only going to be accessing a certain number of views, so we've just, we've granted access to the LogRhythm account to that specific database for views.
Did you have any challenges with encryption from the UDLA to your data center?
No. The UDLA profile really is pretty easy to set up as long as you have that unique identifier and that state field that could either be timestamp or interval from that screenshot. And I think our biggest challenge was really making sure that timestamp was converted to the proper format.
Anyone else?
We've used the UDLA profile for Oracle, for Teradata, for Redshift. Like we've used it for a lot of our use cases.
Other questions?
AWS-centric questions. You mentioned CloudTrail and CloudWatch. Are those currently set to LogRhythm?
We're still actively working on those proof of concepts. So we've managed to have successful connectivity through an API call. But what we don't know yet is what the normal patterns and activity look like for for CloudWatch and CloudTrail so that we know what to monitor against. So right now, all we're really doing is collecting those logs, pulling them through, and analyzing what they look like. But that's another thing, is I would love to collaborate on that. If anybody is successfully using LogRhythm to collect those CloudWatch and CloudTrail logs, please come talk to me. I would love to talk to you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Any additional questions? I think somebody over there. No.
One more, go ahead.
Is LogRhythm addressing that, addressing the collection for cloud SaaS as a whole? Because we've seen that on other products as well, and it sounds like there's more people out there having restrictions as far as log collecting.
It's a very distinct focus for us now. I mean, to answer the question directly, that's top of mind. If you get to see Sue, who's our new VP of engineering, maybe pull her aside and see if you can get any intel from her on where she intends to go with that. But it is absolutely a focus area for us today.
Anybody else have any remaining questions for Rich, Jojo, or Lisa?
Hey, Rich, can you explain how feature requests work if they want to do something, how we handle that?
Sure. Thanks for putting me on the spot. So feature requests, the easiest way to get them in is probably, I would have a conversation with the sales engineer so that they can pull in requirements, and then the sales engineer can take that forward, put it into our system, which then brings visibility up to engineering. Now, I don't want to talk out of turn for engineering. I don't know if there's any engineers in the room, but in the past, we have been somewhat market-driven, meaning, the more requests that feature gets, the more quickly it rises to the top of the list. I don't know if that's still the case. So you might want to try and learn that while you're here over the next few days. But we do have, we've got a distinct direction that we're going when it comes to LogRhythm. I think the industry as a whole is changing, right? Everybody's moving to the cloud. The data set up there is different, right? There's no syslog, very few flat files. Everything is JSON-based. And JSON-based logs present their own set of challenges, but we're there, right? We know how to deal with it and where we're moving forward. And as quickly as we can get those sources added to Open Collector, we will certainly get them out the door. But do keep up with what we've got out there on the community page so that you're abreast of where we're at.
Hey, Rich,
I think
I can certainly assure you that we continue to be market-oriented and customer-oriented in how we're prioritizing our roadmap. So if we look at the market, the broad trends, there's more the vision of where things are going, but we listen to all of our customers, and we're taking that feedback and prioritizing based upon where we do see the most density of need. And one of those needs we've heard about is collecting cloud and SaaS data sources, and that is why we are coming out with this new component, Open Collector. You're going to see that in the next 12 months, you should see an explosion of new support and interfaces for all the most popular cloud sources of data. And it's a big investment. It's a new team we built about a year ago, staffed, and it's a preview right now. And actually, this is the guy. You should really seek out if you want to learn all about Open Collector and cloud collection in general. But we will keep listening to all of you and our customers and prioritizing where we work based upon where we do see both forward needs for our customers, and also what we're getting directly from our customers, and where we're seeing a density of voice across those needs.
And I can add briefly to that we've had a historic process around how we've done feature requests, that they went through the support team or the sales team and came into product, but we didn't do a great job of giving visibility back to the customers that have requested them. So we've been trying out something new on the community. If you haven't seen it, for both new Open Collector device support, so Elastic Beats, we've got a section that's called Ideation in the community. So you can go on there and say, hey, I'm using this device like AWS CloudTrail or Sophos, and here's some of my use cases. And then if somebody else has posted that topic, you can vote on it, and that gives us direct feedback. We've also done it with smart response plugins. So those are 2 areas we're trying to pioneer on the community, see how that works out. And Sophos is one of those that's in the top of that list, and we've actually bumped it up on our roadmap to be one of the next beats that team is going to go after and build. So if you like that format, please give us feedback. If you don't like that format and you want to do feature requests in a different way, we're also looking for how we can further streamline that process, especially to have the feedback loop back into our customer base.
Chris, Bruce, thanks for that.
Oh yeah, I am talking about Open Collector later today. One of the deep dives will be in the Agate room downstairs, I think. One of those mineral rooms. That's right.
Yeah, and Bruce is one of the many product managers who are here in the world. So I encourage you to seek out, talk to our product management team, and share all your experiences, your ideas, your thoughts, your needs, because this team wants to hear them.
All right, thank you, Chris and Bruce. Excuse me, much appreciate the insight there. Anything else we can address for you while we have the team? If any other questions come up, please feel free to reach out to myself or anybody here. If there's anything that you want to discuss offline, we're more than happy to take that out as well. So we can give you guys a couple more minutes to break. Again, thank you. Let's give it up for Lisa and JoJo and Rich. We appreciate it.